The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everyone. This is Matthew Linton from the Council of Graduate Schools, the webinar Leading in an Increasingly Unpredictable Environment. We're just going to give the audience a minute or two to come into the webinar. So we're going to begin here in 1 to 2 minutes. Thank you. Okay, fantastic. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. This is the Council of Graduate Schools webinar, Leading in an Increasingly Unpredictable Environment, the Role of Graduate Deans in Strategic Enrollment Planning. And this webinar is sponsored by Huron. So the plan for today is that we have 4 speakers who will speak for approximately 45 minutes in total, followed by a question and answer session. To begin, Julia Kent of the Council of Graduate Schools will provide welcoming remarks and introduce the webinar. That introduction will be followed by Scott Herness, Janet Rutledge, and John Billings, who will participate in a discussion moderated by Alex Fecklitz for approximately 40 minutes on graduate enrollment trends and strategies. Before we get started with the presentation, just a couple of technical support slides. A reminder that the webinar recording, as well as the slides, will be emailed to all registrants, as well as posted on the Council of Graduate Schools website, and that usually occurs within 1 week of the live event. Please submit questions through the GoToWebinar control panel on the right-hand side. Those questions can be submitted at any time, but they will only be answered during the designated question and answer session. If you're experiencing any technical issues, troubleshooting help is available at the URL below. The most common technical challenge that we run into is audio problems. So if you're having trouble hearing us, you can try switching to a different audio connection. You can change from telephone to mic and speakers or vice versa without leaving the session. If you're experiencing persistent trouble with a telephone connection, you can click problem dialing in for an alternate phone number to dial. And with that, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Julia Kent, Vice President, Best Practices and Strategic Initiatives from the Council of Graduate Schools. Julia?
Thank you, Matt, and good afternoon. And to our members on the West Coast, good morning. Welcome, everyone. We're really glad that you can join us today. We've had a lot of interest in this webinar, which I think speaks to the importance of graduate enrollment management to CGS members. We know that enrollment numbers are on everyone's minds these days. And in a recent member survey, we saw that 84% of our member deans indicated that it is likely or very likely that they will devote a significant portion of their time providing leadership in graduate enrollment management this year. So this topic is an important one, and in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, it's more timely than ever. I'd like to thank Huron for their programmatic and financial support of the webinar. We're really excited to collaborate with them and several CGS member universities to focus on graduate enrollment management today. And at this time, I'd like to introduce Alex Fecklitz, Senior Director with Huron, who will serve as our webinar moderator today. Alex has over 10 years of experience in higher educational consulting. And during that time, she has partnered with more than 30 universities. She is focused on strategic planning, operational assessments, performance improvement, and aligning technology with institutional imperatives. Her higher education experience includes working directly in university settings as well as in consultative roles. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to you, Alex.
Great, thanks so much, Julia. And I appreciate the opportunity to be with everyone across the country today. Today's panelists are proven leaders in the graduate enrollment space, each bringing their unique viewpoint to the current and future state of graduate enrollment. I'd like to introduce Scott Hurness first. Scott is the Vice Provost for Research and Dean of the Graduate School and a Professor of Biology at Montclair State University in Montclair, New Jersey. He previously served as the Interim Vice Provost for Graduate Studies and Dean of the Graduate School at The Ohio State University. And he received his BS from the University of California at Irvine and his PhD from Florida State. His research interests are in the field of sensory neuroscience, where he has pursued an NIH and NSF-funded investigation into the cellular and molecular biology of the peripheral gustatory system. So thanks, Scott, for joining us today. Our next panelist is Janet Rutledge, who I've had the pleasure of knowing for the last year. So Janet serves as the Vice Provost and Dean of the Graduate School of the University of Maryland at Baltimore County. And she is also a faculty member in the Computer Science and Electrical Engineering Department. Prior to coming to UMBC, she was the Program Director for the Graduate Research Fellowships Program at the NSF. She received her BS in Electrical Engineering from RPI and her MS and PhD from Georgia Tech. She currently serves on the Board of Trustees at RPI, the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation Minority PhD Program Advisory Committee, and the TOEFL Board. And she previously served on the CGS board and the GRE boards as well. Last but not least, I have the pleasure of introducing another one of my colleagues who I've known for the last couple of years, John Billings. John is the Director of Graduate Enrollment Management at Gonzaga, which includes arms focused on marketing, recruitment, admissions, and student services. In prior roles at Gonzaga, he supported similar efforts for online programs and led recruiting for the MBA program. And his non-higher ed experience in sports management communications and marketing includes time with the Seattle Sounders. He also just let us know that he spent quite a bit of time reporting on Alaskan baseball. So lots of fun facts about John today. So if we go to the next slide, today's webinar objectives are twofold. We want to spend some time reflecting on where we've been historically, and our panelists will comment on what they're seeing changing at their institutions given the current COVID-19 environment. From there, we'll shift a bit and discuss how our panelists are thinking about enrollment planning, both for the short term to stabilize given the current environment, and how they're thinking about laying a foundation for the long term. This will be centered around Janet sharing her experience with strategic enrollment planning at UMBC. And then our panelists will reflect on techniques for involving faculty in building enrollment and how they're adjusting their enrollment strategies to engage with prospective and current students in the immediate moment. So if we go to the next slide, I'd like to spend a little bit of time, we can go to the next slide, on historical enrollment trends, grounding everyone in where we've been from a graduate enrollment perspective. So over the last 10 years, we've experienced about 5% average annual growth in master's degrees conferred, but that growth has been concentrated in specific fields, most notably health and computer science. During the same time period, we've seen about 2.5% average annual growth in doctoral programs. We all know in the graduate space that the competition is stiff, particularly with recent declines in the international population. And we've been working with several institutions, and I know you all are hard at work thinking about how to sustain current graduate programs within your portfolio and develop new programs aligned with your missions and the labor markets. If we go to the next slide, I'd like to chat a little bit about projections. And I say this, these are the projections that existed prior to March 2020. And so, you know, we all know how strong those stand now. But, you know, just reflecting back, we were expecting enrollment both at the master's and graduates levels to continue to grow. So in the next 10 years, we were hoping that master's enrollment would grow for part-time students at about 5% and about 2% for full-time students. But I'm sure we can all agree that any form or projections will need to be revisited once the dust settles post-COVID-19. I think what's particularly interesting to note here is the noticeable increase that you can see on the chart in full-time enrollment in the 2009 to 2010 timeframe, which aligns with higher unemployment rates. And similar to what you've been seeing across the media, employment in 2020 is now literally off the charts, though we know that it's impacting those with a bachelor's degree a little less intensely than those without. And we'll ask John to comment on this a little bit later. If we go to the next slide, one of the benefits of bringing, looks like all 150 of you together, is that we have an opportunity for point-in-time analysis related to enrollment trends. So for those of you on the line that work with an institution currently, we'd like to hear from you. And we are going to open up a polling question. At your institution or college, how do fall 2020 graduate enrollment projections compare to last year? So there's three choices that you're seeing. You might be ahead of last year, keeping pace with last year, or lagging behind last year, again, for your fall 2020 class. So we'll let you all fill out that poll, and Matt, if you want to bring that back up in a minute or so, that would be great. But I do want to invite Janet Rutledge and then Scott to reflect on what they're seeing at their institutions currently in terms of graduate enrollment. So Janet, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Alex. At UMBC, we're seeing a bit of a cloudy picture, as I assume many of you are as well, particularly with our new incoming students who are international students, because there's just not clarity on whether they will be able to get visas to come in, or whether our courses will be offered in person or online in the fall. And so we've been having lots of discussions, lots of information and town hall sessions, and there's a lot of interest in coming. So potentially our enrollment, as we are looking at admitted students and those who have confirmed, we don't require that people give a deposit. But those numbers are ahead of where we were last year, but we're just not sure what will translate when we actually get to fall.
Great. Thanks, Janet. And Scott, what are you seeing at Montclair State?
So we are slightly ahead of where we were at this time last year. Our fall enrollment's up about 7%, and that includes a good portion of newly enrolled grad students, so it's not just our continuing students. So that's optimistic, but on the other hand, we're also seeing that the number of students who are postponing is increasing as well. 3 times higher than last year. So these are students who said, yes, they want to come to graduate school, but they want to wait a year before they stop. So I'd say the situation's a little confusing overall, but I think that grad education is maybe more adaptable to this pandemic than other areas of higher education, because I think that graduate students are more career-oriented, which means they're more goal-oriented, and that's certainly true in our demographic. We have a large cohort of part-time students, and these are students who are juggling full-time employment and raising a family and going to school. And now that the pandemic has hit, they're doing all of that and being elementary school teachers at the same time. So we know that they're dedicated and they want to get through, and so we want to make sure that we have flexible avenues available to all of our new incoming students.
Great, thanks, Scott. And I think, so we can see the results of the poll up here, and from my perspective, it's looking more promising than I might have anticipated. So thank you to all of you who submitted your answers. So we're seeing about a quarter of those on the line who are ahead of last year in terms of their graduate enrollments, which is great. Around 43% are keeping pace, and then we have about a third that are lagging behind. But, again, welcoming picture to see that we have a strong majority that are ahead or keeping pace. So thanks for sharing that with us. So if we go to the next slide, I think this is an interesting transition to think about what happens when the economy shifts. And so we have some recent data from about 4,000 Americans, and they were responding to questions about what would occur and what they might do if there was to be a shift in their employment. So when we're looking at these results, what's interesting, and when we think about it in a graduate enrollment context, is that about 34% say that they may need more education to find a comparable job if they lost their current job. 36% have indicated that they might be career changers, and so looking for different educational opportunities. And then interestingly, 53% have indicated that they would be more interested or perhaps prefer online education and training programs over those in person. And so again, when we're reflecting on that data from the earlier slide in terms of the interrelatedness between the economy and graduate enrollment, I think it's something interesting to ponder from a graduate enrollment perspective. And I know, John, you studied this or examined this during the last economic crisis of 2008. So would love for you to comment on what you think will happen as we consider the relationship between graduate enrollment and the economy.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I looked at numbers a few years ago and I did some regression modeling just essentially to compare two sets of data. One was enrollments and the other was economy. And so when we looked at 8, 9 and those kind of years, you could look at it from two standpoints. One is that disposable income is going to be down. People are going to be more worried about money than they were before, and everybody's going to, really observe that with a fine-tooth comb as they make decisions about where they invest in their future. So that could mean graduate enrollment goes down. On the other side, you have people who are unemployed, people who are reflected in this slide and looking for changes, new opportunities, or need further education to solidify their roles in their industry right now. And that could make it go up. When we ran the numbers, it honestly was a wash. And what's interesting from that standpoint is the up and the down overall seems to wash out, but maybe by industry doesn't. We're seeing some of that at Gonzaga right now, where programs that are more fast-tracked or professional skilled kind of programs like an Orgel or a MBA program are up. Some maybe in administration for higher ed or something that doesn't have to be done now, but maybe would be a career trajectory move, is down a bit. The one difference really between 8, 9 and now is you got a pandemic in the middle of this too. So that makes people uneasy, and we're seeing, similar to Scott, people saying, I really do want to do this, but maybe not now, or I want to learn some more first.
Great, that's helpful. And I know, Scott and Janet, when you're thinking about your portfolios, you might have, applied masters, you have your research-oriented graduate and doctoral programs. And so I'm virtually giving you a crystal ball right now, and I'd love to hear what you're projecting or what you're seeing might happen in the graduate enrollment space when you think about your institution specifically. So Scott, do you want to start us off here, and then we'll hear from Janet?
Sure. So I think that some of the enrollment trends that we saw pre-COVID in different disciplines can be campus specific. So by that I mean pre-COVID, we had all the growth that in those traditional growth areas that we saw in the previous slide. Our computer science, the data analytics, the nursing program, health sciences had all grown. But what we did not experience was that we did not have enrollment declines in either education or in our MBA program. And in fact, some of those were areas of growth. And my institution started out as a normal school, so we have a very strong College of Education. But now that we're in this pandemic, our thinking really very much aligns with this Strata survey, that there will be students that want to come back to either advance their careers or get more training in order to change careers. And so we're trying to be open to that opportunity, but we're actually thinking about that in education and in business. So we're thinking about developing small micro certificates, badges, programs from pre-existing classes, and I'll give just two very quick examples. We know that the New Jersey Department of Education is creating new certifications for K through 12 teachers. So we know that they'll be coming back to get these new certifications, and we're creating certificate programs for them so we can be ahead of that game. And we also think that there may be students coming back to get practical business skills. Maybe I'll take a couple classes in marketing or accounting or supply chain logistics, and we can offer those. They may even be entry points into master's programs.
Great. Thanks, Thanks, Scott. Appreciate that perspective. And interesting on the education front, just given the declines in education that we've seen overall. Janet, what are your thoughts? What is UMBC focusing on?
Before everything happened with the pandemic, we had done a survey as part of our planning to see what our students were interested in. And we were finding that students wanted more online and hybrid online, where courses met sometimes online and sometimes in person. And there was a little bit of a pushback from some of our faculty with a discomfort with online. And as faculty have had to make the rapid transition to online, as we did a little bit of a polling, we found that many of them are now more open to the idea. So our ability to switch many of our courses to hybrid online may be able to move faster than we had originally predicted that it would. And so I think that that's quite exciting. Our Faculty Development Center has been running courses on how to do effective online and hybrid, and there were a few faculty in them. Now we're seeing lots more interest from our faculty in learning how to be better at online, particularly given that we're not sure what state we're going to be in this fall.
That's great. Thanks, Janet. And I'm thinking that a lot of other institutions may have seen a similar shift in their faculty in terms of openness to teaching online and hybrid. So in that way, I think our current situation has definitely presented an opportunity. So thank you for sharing that. If we go to the next slide, I do want to transition a bit into this next section of the webinar, where we'll focus on, how our panelists are addressing current challenges, but also focusing on that long-term horizon. And so if we go to the next slide, I wanted to share a framework with you that we've been utilizing when we partner with different institutions across the country. So you all, we know, are joining this call because you're leaders at your institutions and you want to ensure that you're doing what's best from an enrollment perspective in that cloudy environment that Janet described earlier in the webinar. So we find this triage, stabilize, and transform framework helpful for a few reasons, and I'll explain this framework and then we can move forward. So many institutions right now are operating in this triage phase where leaders are reacting promptly to ensure the safety of their constituents and also ensuring business continuity for critical activities. And what we'll hear later on from Scott and Janet and John is how they're responding to ensure that they remain sustainable, this summer and this fall. Several institutions are beginning to move into more of a period of stabilization where leaders are assessing the financial and cultural realities of COVID and shifting resources to prepare for that fall term with an emphasis on financial sustainability, academic quality, student service delivery, and risk mitigation. And then we're also seeing many institutions operate in multiple phases at once. And this is what I would reflect UMBC is doing. So they're responding to short-term challenges, but they're also laying the foundation for that long-term transformation. And so I think, I want to transition at this point to Janet, who will share her story in a little bit more depth. What I'd also like to point out at this time is as we transition and hear a little bit more about Janet's experience with strategic enrollment planning, and again, both addressing those short-term challenges and planning for the long term, there is an article posted within the webinar, and that's specific to University of Wyoming, but that should just give you all more context if you're interested in understanding the process in more depth. So with that, I'll turn it over to Janet. And Janet, we'd love to, again, hear your overview of what strategic enrollment planning is and what it meant at UMBC.
Thank you, Alex. And this was actually a learning experience for me as well. When our university first started talking about strategic enrollment planning, it was in part in response to the real fear of what was happening with the projections of how many 18-year-olds there would be graduating from high schools as the pipeline into our undergraduate programs. Because after all, I think at most of our universities, most of the net tuition revenue comes from the undergraduate enrollment. And we had a really interesting decision to make as to whether this would be an undergraduate strategic enrollment plan or a plan that was for the whole university, involving undergraduate, master's, PhD, and even post-baccalaureate certificates. So when we think of a plan, it's not just the enrollment growth. It's not just how many students do we want to have, but how are we going to get there? What is the composition of that enrollment? And that can be anything from demographics, looking at the diversity, the academic quality. It's also, we've been discussing what proportion of undergraduate and graduate students do we want to have? What proportion of our graduate students should be in applied programs versus traditional programs? What proportion do we want in our doctoral programs? And then the all-important net tuition revenue. So often we think of our universities as these halls of higher learning where really the only thing that matters is the learning aspects. But we all know that we have to worry about the budgets of our universities, and coming up when in a pandemic area, understanding the budget implications of our enrollment has gotten even more important. So it's really critical that your strategic enrollment planning include all three of those. Next slide. So as we began this activity, and in the past, when we focused so much on undergraduate, there are lots of tools that are available to look at undergraduate enrollment. And when we have talked with the consultants that are putting together these various tools, and I say, well, what about graduate enrollment? And they say, oh, well, we really don't have anything for graduate enrollment. And our university would say, well, we'll get to graduate enrollment later, but we're first going to focus on undergraduate enrollment. And I think it was really wise that the campus leadership realized that we needed to be looking at both undergraduate and graduate enrollment and how the two fit together. And so that's what we're talking about here when we say collectively defined statement of purpose, because we have to figure out what it is that we're trying to do and how do we get the data to inform the future stated priorities. And this is where having consultants can be really important, whether it's a company like Huron or whether it's the CGS process, because all of us have data that we're looking at. All of us think that we're asking good questions and we're getting the data that we need. But one of the things that we've found is that when we have outsiders come in and start asking us questions, we realize that there might be a better way to look at things. We realize there might be things that we're not actually thinking about, or some things that we're taking for granted. For example, one of the initial suggestions that came out of our plan is that we needed to have an accelerated bachelor's master's program. Well, we've had a program for 15 years. And so the message to us was, okay, so we have this program, but nobody's talking about it and nobody's paying attention to it, and it wasn't something that was rising to the top when Huron was looking through our pages to see what our messages were. And as a result of just starting to talk about that, many of our programs are reinvigorating their accelerated bachelor's master's program. And this is where undergraduate and graduate come together, and without having a plan that involves both sectors, that probably wouldn't have been happening. We've been talking about how to plan for programs that are meeting the needs of employers and meeting the needs of students, where there's a lot more demand and opportunities for growth. We've also been asking questions of who we are as a university and where we want to put our priorities. And most importantly, we've had to have the involvement of campus stakeholders. So traditionally, enrollment growth at the graduate level has been a priority for the university, but it was always not everyone else's responsibility. And so when the president would say, well, what's happening with enrollment, with graduate enrollment, everyone would turn and look at me. And I didn't have control over what was happening in the programs. I didn't have control over the budgets of the academic departments. And so now we have a plan that involves all of the campus leadership, including the deans and including the faculty. And I think that this is the difference between our business as usual and our focus on our planning moving forward.
Thanks, Janet. Yeah, I think that was a great overview. And I did want to transition because I think at UMBC in particular, you know, you and the provost and others emphasized the importance of shared governance and involving faculty in this process. And I know that it's not always the easiest thing to do. So would love to hear from you first, and then Scott, in terms of ways that others on the phone might think about involving faculty more broadly in some of their current enrollment efforts. So Janet, I'll hand it over to you first.
Sure. Well, in graduate enrollment, the enrollment decisions really lie at the department. And so my initial reaction was, the faculty own this process. They're the ones who are controlling who's getting in. One of the first things that we did in the fall when we started this strategic planning process is that Huron went around and had meetings with the various shared governance groups. And so they had a focus group with our graduate program directors. On many of your campuses, you call them the directors of graduate studies. And we were really shocked to hear that so many of them didn't know what their role was in enrollment planning. And so even though we had been talking about it, apparently we hadn't talked about it in a way that they understood what their role was, both from setting the goals to implementing and doing the measurement of the goals. We had made available tools for them to track their enrollment, but many of them weren't using it because we'd look at the applications that came in and we'd accept the people that we wanted. The numbers might go up or down depending on the graduate assistantships that we had available or which faculty wanted to take on students. And it was really a very loose system where you couldn't really say what was success unless many of the departments defined it as we got the students that we really were excited about getting, but not really thinking about where was this going in the long run. So when we think about the common challenges, having a vision and a strategy for enrollment is really important. Having expertise within the departments. So we have a system where the graduate program director may or may not be the person who's in charge of admissions. The person holding that role rotates, and so sometimes the graduate program director is involved, sometimes there's a separate director of graduate admissions, but there's rarely any preparation for helping the person be successful in this role other than how do you access the online application review system that we have. Thinking about how funding is related to achieving your enrollment goals, not having opportunities for our, if we want to, if we're creating new programs, faculty often don't have the ability to be able to create those new courses because they're so busy doing other things. So I think that the strategies to address some of these challenges, resource allocation is really important to make sure that you are supporting what you say that you want to do.
Great. Thanks, Janet. And I think, Scott, you had some similar thoughts about resource allocation. So we'd love to hear your perspective of how you're getting your faculty involved to really drive the growth of enrollment at Montclair State.
Yeah, I really agree with what Janet has said, and particularly graduate admission is a very different animal than undergraduate admission. It lies with the faculty. So faculty are key to enrollment, and they're certainly the essential partners for growing graduate enrollment on any campus. We've had a few strategies that we've used to work with faculty and to get faculty involvement and faculty buy-in. One that I would just like to state is having a very clear, consistent, transparent message from senior administration on what is the goal of graduate enrollment. So by that I mean the president and the provost's office. On our campus, the president has made it very clear that we are going to grow graduate enrollment. That is a #1 strategic goal of the institution, and everybody needs to get on board and grow graduate programs. I can say that makes my job a lot easier. I don't have to go out and try to convince graduate programs that they should grow. Of course, there's a few exceptions to that, but I can work with graduate programs and say, how are we going to do this? How can we do this together? How can we grow? So the graduate school partners with all of the grad program directors, holds them by the hand, helps them through our new CRM system, works toward completing applications, making their lives as easy as possible. But something that we've done the last year that's really paid off in unexpected ways is for faculty engagement is we've been working with our graduate council. So our graduate council is the faculty representative body for grad education, for graduate policy, and we know that faculty often respond better to other faculty members than they may to a central mandate coming down from on top. Well, we had the central mandate coming down from on top, but we've been working with grad council, and we've just concluded at the end of this academic year, we've just concluded a year-long series of strategic high-level conversations about the issues of graduate education that are important to our campus. So we've been talking about things like holistic admission. We've been talking about the use of standardized testing, how we can help our international students, how we can employ alumni better. And these conversations have turned out to be quite prescient to the changes that we've made in response to the pandemic that's now on us. So it was very easy for us to make some changes in the admission and recruitment procedures because it already had the foundation that had been laid over the last year of the work we've done with the grad council. Our grad council meetings have traditionally been large, and by that I mean we have grad faculty representatives, but we also have assistant deans, associate deans, or the library that attends grad council meetings. So this message of grad council, which is coming from faculty, gets disseminated out across campus to other faculty. And so it's been great to have a partner with us. We have faculty partners that are helping us to achieve this very unambiguous goal on campus, which is to grow graduate enrollment.
Great. Thanks again, Scott and Janet. I think those are very useful ways to think about how you again might generate that buy-in among the faculty to reach those growth goals. John, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add something else, just really briefly. Dashboards there, as Scott mentioned some of that. It's amazing how when we bring the faculty in and educate them a bit more, then they're more excited to be involved. So any way that you can bring them onto the same page, oftentimes I find that they want to be involved, but they don't necessarily know, or the language isn't theirs at that point, and they find that's tough to jump in. So dashboards, ways to show them the numbers, get them involved in what's going on, then it's much more likely they're going to participate.
Absolutely. Thanks, John. So if we go to the next slide, for the next several minutes, I'd like us to transition and hear from our panelists in terms of how they're responding now. So if we're thinking about that framework, focusing on the triage and stabilized phases. And so what we'll do is we'll look at 3 different phases of the student life cycle. One is building the pipeline, the second is recruiting, and the third is how we're supporting our current students. And we'll have the panelists reflect on those different areas just so we can all learn how we can respond in this cloudy environment. So let's start with you again, John. In terms of pipeline building, I'm sure that you're amplifying certain strategies, or perhaps you're trying new things when it comes to graduate enrollment. Can you share some specifics with us and what you think might work in this context?
Yeah, sure. As far as the pipeline that's already been in some of our programs or we're trying to expand, one is military. And that's a hard one, I know, but it's a good reminder for us because everybody wants more military, maybe veterans or active duty or spouses. But when you really think about it, that's an industry that has got no layoffs right now. still has funding to support their experience on higher ed. So it's ripe. So for a few of our programs, specifically our organizational leadership, we were really building a campaign to target a group that's already resonated with that program. We're trying to increase it. So an example of kind of expanding a pipeline. Another one is our alumni. You know, every school is going to have people who you are trying to convince others to come and that this is worth their investment. Alumni are already partially there. You know, they already like your school, and it's about finding the right fit for them. So some programs, certificate offerings, things that Scott mentioned earlier are great for this. We've actually just launched an alumni scholarship to discount our graduate education for Gonzaga alumni. And I think there's two benefits to this. One is we're really helping at a time of need, and the PR around that is so powerful to say Gonzaga cares about their own. And then two, you actually do get people who are thinking about this anyway, or maybe they're looking for a career change or a career progression, and this sets them over the top. So we've just launched that, and I've already seen really positive results from that. The last thing I would note is the peripheral things. Like Janet and Scott mentioned, right now I think everybody around the nation is getting confirmations from students or accepting students and waiting on their confirmations, and people are deferring, or they're saying, let me wait and see. Any way that we can help create a feeling of some calm around the future waters is a positive. So we've really doubled down efforts in our onboarding phase. And that's basically that confirmation to enrolled phase. How can we do more virtual orientations? How can we get in the student's shoes and figure out what really would their concerns be right now and calm some of those fears? And everything that we're doing in that phase has really helped to improve, you know, the hard work that we've done to get people to that step of the door to walk through it and feel confident in what's going to happen down the line. There's so many unknowns, even, you know, university-wide, there's questions around what's going to happen in the fall and what's coming up and how things are going to change. So we don't have all the answers, but just by reaching out to students and helping them to see that we do understand their concerns, even if we don't have those answers, is building that trust factor, and it's improving enrollments.
Great. Thanks, John. I could use one of those phone calls about being calm if you want to, you know, send that my way. Janet, is there anything that you would add from a pipeline perspective here?
Sure. I already mentioned our increased emphasis on our undergraduates and our undergraduates staying for our graduate programs. We are a public university in Maryland, and we are in the heart of the metropolitan area. So many of our alumni who stay in the state are within a very easy commuting distance to campus. And so they, as John said, they already know us, they already love us, and we talk with them about what we can do to help them meet their needs, whether it's by going full-time or whether it's going part-time, etc. We are starting up a peer-to-peer ambassador program for our international students because there is so much uncertainty during this period of time. And so throughout the summer, we plan to have a much more organized ambassador program. In the past, it's sort of been informal and ad hoc, and we believe that this will really make a difference in helping our students make that transition to Maryland.
Great, thanks. So if we can go to the next slide, I'd love to hear from you, Scott, in terms of recruiting, right? So perhaps a student has applied, they're interested. What have you been shifting or doing differently to try to yield those students?
Yes, so it's been challenging times. We've all had to turn on a dime as a result of this pandemic, and our recruiting efforts are no different. I just want to emphasize that this truly is planning in unpredictability, because we've never been here before. And there's a lot of field ahead of us between now and the fall semester. So we had to think about really two things. First is like, how do we contact students? How do students contact us? How do we do recruiting talk? And then how can we make the application process a little easier for our students to try to encourage applications? Previously, you know, prospective students could just walk into the grad school and talk to one of our recruiters, and the campus is closed. They can't do that anymore. We immediately brought on a utility called youcanbookme.com. And when students, that's the real name, when students contact us that they're interested in graduate school, we send them that link and they can see our recruiters' calendars and they can actually book an appointment with them right away. Just like in the old days when you could like book a appointment at the barbershop online. Maybe one day that'll come back. We also had lots of events, face-to-face events, small recruiting events, large recruiting events. They all had to get turned into webinars overnight, immediately. And so right now we're having like 1 to 3 webinars a day. The webinars are often just specific for a particular graduate program, but many of them are very large. We have over 100 people attending these webinars. And when the students do attend the webinar, they get a waiver of the application fee. So for any other student, there's a fee to apply for graduate school. At our campus, it's $60. So we waive that $60 fee. They've also asked me to provide some short videos for our prospective students. Like when a student is interested, they get a link for a little 30-second video for the dean saying, I'm glad that you're interested. We're here to help you, and we can help you walk through this application process. I said to my team, are you sure this wouldn't scare them away? But they assured me that this was a good thing. So when a student accepts, they can get a link to another video where the dean is encouraging them to enroll. Then we wanted to make the application process a little easier for students, and we made a few changes. For example, we went right away to unofficial transcripts. So that took some work on the back end. We'll get the official transcripts later, but it makes it easier for a student to apply. We have more language tests for language language proficiency now than we had before, because we know some international students were having trouble accessing a testing site. And I think importantly, we have far fewer programs that are requiring a standardized test like the GRE. We have, and I mentioned earlier, our conversations with grad council, and I know that's been a part of this. We have a great little website where a student can go and look at the program that they're interested in, and they can see what the waivers are in that program for taking the GRE. And it often will be something like, if you have a 3.0 undergraduate GPA, you do not have to take the GRE. And I think that removes a really big barrier. And we had silly things. When students previously, when they accepted, they would walk into the grad school and hand us a deposit check, and we would take it and deposit it. We didn't have direct deposit on our websites. That was a goal, but we hadn't done it yet. We were suddenly very motivated to get that done right away so that students could get reviewed, get accepted, deposit it, and come on. So we want to meet these students where they're at. We want to make it easier for them to get into grad education. We haven't changed the standards for admission, but we've just made it easier for them to apply.
Great. Thanks so much, Scott. And I think lastly, Janet, I'd love for you to spend a couple of minutes talking about what you're doing to support your current students and almost re-recruit them so that they're enrolling in the fall. So if you could spend a couple minutes on that, that would be great. And then we'll move over to Q&A. And just a reminder to those of you on the line, if you have a question, please submit it, and we'll spend some time at the end getting those answered by our very wise panelists. So Janet, tell us a little bit more about current students.
Sure. Well, as you can imagine, the upheaval in so many of our students' lives has really focused on financial resources and financial needs. Some of our students were working part-time. Some of them were working on in places that they're no longer able to work. Some of our international students, the banking systems in their countries have been closed and they haven't been able to get money. So our university set up what we call the Stay Black and Gold. Those are our school colors, the Stay Black and Gold Fund. And that had been a small fund in the past, but there was a reaching out to our alumni, and the response was just incredible. And so we've been able to serve a number of students on that. Interestingly enough, graduate students are about 20% of our population, but about 40% of the applications came from graduate students to that fund. Of course, we're building in flexibility with deadlines and time to meet various milestones. And we're reassuring students that we're going to work with them in any way possible. We've been focusing on mental wellness for the past probably 18 months. And we did a check-in with our students to see how things were going in the transition to being online. And it was really telling to see how many students were struggling with motivation issues. So students who had, academics were very motivated, working hard, but I can understand the motivation issues. As my world became online too, it's been very disorienting for me. And students are having issues with having to share their space with so many other people. Some are back at home with their families. Others are around their roommates more when they used to spend more time in their campus offices. And now with everyone together trying to do work, it can have a lot of distractions. Our counseling center has had drop-in sessions for graduate students where each session had a different topic that are very timely for things that students are facing. And we've had really good response to that, much more response than we've had in the past for when our counseling center reached out to graduate students. And finally, with all of the students who responded to the survey, we followed up with them directly to let them know what resources are available. We also had a town hall for our graduate students to answer questions on things that they've had, questions on many policies. So like your universities, we've made our pass-fail options more flexible. We've extended the deadlines to withdraw from courses till after they get to see their grades, in fact. And I think that in this time of uncertainty, it's really important that we support both the mental health issues, but also mental wellness issues. And keep reminding our current students what it is that that we're here for them, that we're supporting their success, what they are able to do with the various degrees that we have. And I think that it's just keeping that line of communication open has been really, really important.
Absolutely. I think the stress right now is higher than ever, and so it's great to hear how you're supporting your students in that capacity. So I do want to turn it over to Q&A for about the next 6 or 7 minutes. I'll start with you, Scott. So one of the panelists, you, Scott, mentioned micro-credentialing, I believe. So we are interested in these options, but we are getting pushback from our financial aid office due to federal reporting regulations regarding gainful employment. How are you working with your aid office on reporting requirements? Just would love to hear any quick techniques there.
We're in the process of doing that right now. That's a very good question that arose right away on our radar screen as well. And we are working to redefine what full-time enrollment is at the institution. So that students that would be taking 3 credits would be eligible for financial aid. So that's one of the things, and we're trying to see what unintended consequences that might have, but we're in the middle of those discussions. Gainful employment is something that's really outside of the institution and the graduate school. So when we're looking for new opportunities, we'd like them to fall into those categories if at all possible. I think it will be important for students with an impending recession upon us to be able to be eligible for financial aid opportunities. And so we're thinking about that in the creation of these smaller programs.
Great. That's very helpful. There's another question that came in related to waiving testing requirements, and I know, Scott, that was something that you were doing, and other panelists, feel free to jump in. Is that something that you're doing across the board, or is it for specific programs? I think people were interested in hearing a little bit more about that.
Yeah, it's not something that we're doing across the board. There's always a lot of misunderstanding at both of my institutions, and the graduate schools in both of my institutions, that the graduate school was requiring the GRE. In both cases, we have never. It's been a program requirement. The programs want the GREs, and they're the ones who are saying that they want all of their students to take the GREs. So we build that into the application process because that's what the program has asked for. We're trying to educate programs, and we've had a number on what's the value of that. And we've had a number of graduate programs who have gone back and done sort of retroactive data analysis on their students. To see students we admitted 3 years ago, what were their GPAs, what were their GRE scores, what were their outcomes, how did they do? And they're finding that students that, in some cases, a student has a 2.7 GPA, yeah, they want to know more about that student, and the GRE is helpful. But for many of the students, it didn't really provide them any useful information at admission, and it's a barrier to getting students to apply because it's a big thing to have to study and take the GRE. And so we're trying to provide some information and education for the programs to make their own decisions about whether they want the GRE or the GMAT in business. And it's their decision to make.
We're seeing like the same thing. You know, you can't just walk into a faculty department and say, hey, we think you should stop doing this. You got to show some statistics, but it's not that hard to pull. And when you do, you see there's not much correlation between success on standardized tests like that and success in the programs. In fact, sometimes those who don't score as highly on that work harder in the graduate space, and that ends up being more important. So we've done the similar kind of stuff. And then, you know, I know programs like GMAT and GRE and the TOEFL, some of those kind of tests have had some different online offerings. So if you do have to, they've sort of lessened the stringent nature of it. But Scott's right. In the end, it doesn't seem to be very indicative. And I think a lot of times the faculty want to add a barrier to make sure that the student's serious. And it's about kind of describing that situation and for them to realize this is a serious enough thing. You've got work and family and all that, and you want to add grad to it. That's serious enough. They are opting into that, and you don't need the GRE to validate it.
Great, thanks, John. So,
can I just give a caution as people race to say that the GRE is more of a barrier than anything else, that people should be cautioned about over-reliance on GPA. Because if you look at the data on GPA, what we see is that the distribution of grades is not the same at every university. In general, private universities tend to give higher grades than public universities. And so we could be enticed by saying, oh, here's someone who came from a well-known university and has a high GPA versus this person who came from the regional state university with a lower GPA, and so person A is a better performer than person B. And that is not always going to be the case because we know that our regional state universities actually across the board have lower GPAs on average. So when people are talking about going to holistic review, it really needs to be holistic and not just saying, I'm going to take the high GPA and I'm going to throw out the standardized test.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point. So we had some other questions around international students, and I think what we can do is work with the panelists to get their perspectives on, what they're doing in the international space. But wanted to thank everyone again for submitting their questions. I would like to spend, 30 seconds or so, Matt, if we can go to the slide on Huron. So first of all, thank you to all of you that participated today. We had a chance to speak a little bit about our work in the student strategy space, but also wanted to let you all know that we do quite a bit of work implementing technology in student HR and finance. And then I know that several of you are deans or assistant deans on the line, and Huron got its roots in the research space, and we've built a very strong practice around the research enterprise in terms of improving service, compliance, and financial performance. So I'll pause there, but just wanted to thank you again. And my contact information is on the next slide as well. So before I turn it over to CGS, just wanted to thank our panelists, who I think have been incredible and have given so much of their time when we don't have any time to give. So just wanted to thank you all again. Very much appreciate you participating, and I think everyone on the line, I'm assured, have learned quite a bit from you. So thanks for your time today. And Matt, I'll turn it over to you to close it out.
Okay, thank you, Alex. Thank you to Huron for their sponsorship. Thank you to the presenters, and thank you to the audience for your great questions and listening. Just a couple of quick notes before we end here. You can visit CGS's hub on the COVID-19 related programming at cgsnet.org/navigating-COVID-19-pandemic. We also have an upcoming webinar, Moving to a Virtual Space, How to Create Virtual Graduate Student Orientations. That's on Tuesday, May 18th from 3:30 to 4:30 p.m. The registration for that is currently full, but as a member benefit, we will be offering a recording as well as the presentation slides of that webinar to members. And as always, you can get information on CGS's slate of webinar programming at cgsnet.org/cgs-webinars, and that's a constantly updating list. So thank you all again. Have a great day and be well.